One of the most frustrating parts of trying to reconcile with an ex-partner is when they refuse to see that you've changed. It can feel super dismissive. You can feel overlooked and ultimately feel kind of powerless. Like the changes that you know you've made amounts to nothing. And when I start with new members, this is one of the things that they find is this exact scenario. They've made a lot of changes, a lot of growth, but their partner is still seeing them as they were 6 months ago or a year ago, despite the changes that they've made. But the truth is that there is a psychological mechanism behind this resistance. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the psychological mechanism behind this resistance to your change, the mistakes you can make in trying to get your partner to adapt to your new changes, and the 3 steps that actually show your changes without manipulation or games. So, you may have wondered why your ex seems determined to overlook your improvements. Making real changes takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of humility to do. Maybe you've become more patient, maybe you've become more attentive, maybe you've finally addressing those issues that your partner always complained about, yet somehow they still see you as the same person that they left. But your ex isn't crazy. They're not trying to be stubborn. This is a powerful psychological protection mechanism that automatically activates in your ex's brain. Their resistance to seeing your growth is their nervous system working overtime to maintain stability and validate their past choices. And this is what we call expectancy bias. Now, I've done a deeper dive on expectancy bias, which I'll link to on the screen and in the description down below if you want a deeper look into all of this. But to give you a bit of an overview of it, is your ex's brain is wired to resist acknowledging your changes because it threatens their decision to leave you. If they admit that you've genuinely improved, they may have to question whether ending the relationship was the right call. So the mind kind of faces 2 opposing realities. I left this person because they couldn't change versus this person has actually changed. And this is what expectancy bias is. It's the bias to expecting you to do the same things. So rather than grapple with this uncomfortable contradiction, the brain just takes the path of least resistance, which is filtering out the evidence of your transformation. And this cognitive dissonance, this uncomfortable mental state that occurs when new information challenges existing views, is the foundation of this resistance. This discomfort of new evidence to the existing situation, which took a long time to build up to make that decision, can cause this cognitive dissonance. And this is because ultimately when you're in a relationship, you make these unconscious relationship contracts. So if you think of these as the kind of operating system of your relationship, these are unspoken rules and patterns that defined your time together. So when you were together, you both played certain roles. Maybe you were the overly emotional one and they were the rational one, or you were the chaser or they were the distancer, whatever it is. When you start to change and you start to realize your own flaws and you start to become more self-aware of how you acted in the relationship and you start to change these patterns, you're effectively rewriting parts of that unconscious contract. And this is doing it without your partner's consent. So if you think about it, for years, they saw a particular image when looking at you. Now that image is different and it's disorienting for them. Their brain scrambles to maintain consistency by either not seeing your changes or dismissing them as temporary efforts, even if you've started to prove that you are making changes long term. And this isn't personal. This is a natural human instinct. It's a nervous system trying to maintain equilibrium. We humans are hardwired to preserve our worldview rather than constantly revisiting it, because it takes a lot of brain power to constantly revisit whether your view of the world or people should be challenged. So your ex made a significant decision to end things, and acknowledging your growth forces them to question that decision, and their resistance serves as self-protection, not necessarily a reflection of their feelings towards you. That's crucial to know. The problem is that the harder you try to demonstrate your change, the stronger their resistance grows. It's kind of like pushing up against a brick wall that pushes back with equal force. When you're repeatedly telling them and trying to convince them, look, see how I've changed, you're actually reinforcing their resistance. Each attempt at trying to force them to see changes triggers their psychological defense mechanism, and this creates a cycle where your efforts make it even harder for them to see your transformation. And this is why this concept of expectancy bias is so crucial to understand, because their brain can actually force their behavior to push you to act in ways that you used to act. Heightened version of their previous role in the relationship in order to trigger your previous role in the relationship. This is creating a world where they have an expectation and they're pushing to create that expectation into reality. So understanding this resistance is the crucial first step to breaking through it. The path forward isn't about convincing your partner or ex-partner through words, but creating the space for them to discover your transformation on their own terms. It's giving them the autonomy and respect to know that they will see your changes over the long term. So does that mean that you're powerless, that you have no control over the situation? Well, no, actually, there is a 3-step system to be able to make your changes visible without pushing or manipulation. So the real breakthrough happens when you stop trying to be seen and instead change the game itself. So a lot of people focus entirely on personal improvements whilst ignoring the invisible relationship contracts that keep their ex locked into seeing them through this outdated lens. So if you think about it, these games, these are unconscious contracts that define your dynamic, and they're still running in the background even after the breakup. They're the reason why simply telling your ex about your changes will never work. When you say I've changed, their internal alarm system immediately activates and it triggers skepticism and this resistance, this expectancy bias. So the first step in this is to identify the game. So map out the specific patterns that defined your relationship. Were you caught blaming your partner in a toxic cycle? Did one of you play the rescuer while the other one was the victim? Think about these unconscious patterns that you played into. Identify the game. These patterns create a comfort zone. Dysfunctional, perhaps, but familiar. And understanding your role is crucial because you can't change a game you don't recognize. Step 2 is to propose new rules. So once you've identified the game, it's time to start shifting the dynamics. So this isn't about declaring change, it's about demonstrating it through new interaction patterns. And this is done by leading with your actions. So instead of making suggestions or asking questions saying, hey, can we change this? Actually starting to lead by example by showing in your actions new potential ways to interact. So this is changing your communication. This is addressing your own emotional flaws and starting to establish a new pattern that leads the relationship forward, understanding that for a while your partner is going to have this expectancy bias and is going to resist these patterns, but being able to stay strong in this new pattern, in this new proposed version of the relationship is going to be really crucial. Learning how to lead conversations and lead them in a positive direction is going to have the biggest impact. And then step 3 is to start to create new connection points. So finally, as you start to change these patterns and you start to lead the relationship in a different direction, as your partner will start to recognize these changes internally, this is where resistance becomes at its highest. Finally, it's important to understand that as this resistance builds, being able to lean in instead of avoid it, being able to show up during these difficult moments, these unconscious tests, is going to be really, really crucial. Now, this is what so many of my successful members have found so important, is learning how to deal with these tough conversations and being able to use this as a new connection point with their partner, which I'll get to in a second, rather than something to be afraid of, rather than something to feel down about. So, like I said, I'm going to jump onto understanding this connection point in a second, but if you do want to join the members and I, then sign up for my relationship bootcamp where you'll learn the same fundamental steps that all my members start with to start repairing and reconciling their relationship. Just click on the link in the description to join us. Like I said, step 3 is creating new connection points. So a lot of people will see these potential arguments or stonewalling or difficulty communicating, your partner giving you tough truths as points of disconnect. However, these can all be turned into points of connection where your partner will start to see that you have changed because you're showing up differently. So as expectancy bias rises, your ability to lean in to all of these moments and turn them into positives is going to be really crucial. This is where your changes can be demonstrated naturally rather than trying to persuade or show them off. So if you think about it in the past, these points that may have turned into arguments now can be turned into points of connection. And this is establishing new rules within the relationship and showing that your changes are real. What this does is this actually starts to establish a neutral ground for you both, where both of you can operate outside of the predetermined strategies that you used to use in the past. These neutral spaces allow your ex to experience your changes directly rather than being told about them. And each step builds on the previous one. Identifying these patterns reveals what needs changing, proposing new rules establishes how you'll interact differently, and creating these neutral connection points provides where these changes can be demonstrated without pressure. And this progression system disrupts the old unconscious contracts that kept your relationship locked in these outdated patterns. Because ultimately, the key to having your changes recognized is not in receiving validation from your ex, but in fully committing to your personal growth for yourself. So when you anchor your transformation in being able to validate yourself, being able to understand the rules and be able to change them regardless of whether your partner is recognizing them, this is where the biggest change happens. Your authentic growth becomes undeniable to not only your partner, but to other people as well, because it's genuine, not performative. I've done a deeper dive video into the idea of persuading your partner, of trying to convince them of your changes. I'll link to that on the screen. But ultimately, your natural pattern trying to convince your partner is part of the previous relationship. And this is not what you want. You don't want to bring the previous relationship into your new relationship with your partner that you're trying to build. You want to get out of that old pattern. Ironically, that starts by stopping the previous pattern. So stopping these persuasive promises that a lot of people do. And by doing this pattern disrupts your partner and gets them to see your changes rather than having to try to persuade them. So I'll leave you with that deep dive video, and I'll see you over there.